All right, let's turn to some headlines from across Texas. New this afternoon, Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton is launching a new effort to enforce Senate Bill 8, the so-called bathroom bill. The Texas Women's Privacy Act requires people in city, county, and state-owned facilities, public schools and universities and jails to use bathrooms and locker rooms that match the sex of their reproductive organs. Agencies that don't comply could face steep fines from the state. Today, the AG's office announced it has launched an online form for people to submit complaints against any agency they believe is violating the law. The form requires you to fill out when and where the alleged violation happened, along with a description and any evidence you may have, like photos. In a release, Attorney General Paxton wrote, quote, "Together we will uproot and bring justice to any state agency or political subdivision that opens the door for men to violate women's privacy, dignity, and safety," end quote. Well, tomorrow marks 2 weeks since the law went into effect, and reporting from the Texas Tribune reveals one group's efforts to test how the law will be enforced ended in 4 transgender women being banned from the Capitol for a year. Reporter Ayden Runnels with the Texas Tribune broke this story last week. They join us now to break down what happened. Ayden, thanks for your time.
Of course, thank you for having me.
So talk to us a little bit about what happened. This incident actually happened before the law went into effect, right?
No, so it actually this happened Saturday after the law went into effect. So it happened on December 6th. About 15 protesters went down to the state capitol. Most of them trans women, went into the women's restroom first with no issue, came back out, gave some speeches in the main rotunda of the Capitol. And then when they tried to go back into the restroom, they were stopped by Department of Public Safety officers. That's when there were, they traded information. DPS officers asked a couple of them for their IDs. A couple of transgender women were allowed into that restroom, and a few were escorted out of the Capitol by officers.
So one of the things that is interesting when you talk about what happened versus the IDs, right? So this is where there's sort of an issue, some would say, some lawmakers would say, with the law versus what's on your ID, what's on your birth certificate. Explain all that for us.
Yeah, absolutely. So Senate Bill 8 defines sex as male and female based off of reproductive organs, and it tells agencies and institutions to take, quote, every reasonable step to enforce the law. But it's really up to agencies what, every reasonable step looks like. So in DPS's case, they decided to check IDs. Some of the trans women who ended up going to the restroom had IDs that had F for female, and were allowed into the restroom, even though technically based off of, the sex definitions in the law, that would be against the policy. So there's a lot of confusion over how this bill or how this law can be enforced. I think it's important to note that State Senator Mays Middleton, who authored the bill, initially said things like, physical inspections of people did not constitute every reasonable step. But most places so far, like colleges and a few agencies, are simply adopting a written policy or placing new signage outside of their bathrooms.
And so then let's also talk about another factor to this law that I think is really interesting is they have to do any reasonable step. But then even if someone files a complaint, that complaint process, there are things that happen before a fine actually gets issued, right?
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. So before anyone can file a complaint through the tip line that Attorney General Ken Paxton released today, they have to submit a complaint to the institution, and then the institution has 3 days to cure the violation by adjusting their policy, creating a policy if they don't have one, and only then can that complaint be filed with the Attorney General, and then that process begin. And then there's an investigation. The Attorney General communicates with the agency. So there's actually several different steps that happen before any potential fines are administered.
And so you have some people who have said that this sort of equates to a law in name only, that it's just not practical, right?
Yeah, certainly advocates and opponents of the law have said that they feel the purpose of the law is more to scare people or to cause intimidation or harassment in public spaces. They point to this tip line, and also the fact that people can sue institutions if they're party to a violation, if they witness a violation, for damages as a sign of this sort of chilling effect. But of course, supporters of the law say, it's about protecting women's private spaces.
Right. Ayden Runnels with the Texas Tribune. You can read the full report at texastribune.org. Thanks so much for taking some time out to talk with us.
Of course. Thank you for having me.